economic downturn. Uh, especially after this economic downturn, a lot of folks are going to have to pivot careers, and we need to make sure that they have access to state-funded grants to be able to attend. And one thing I want us to look at long-term is the state legislature pulling back the ability to set tuition. That's something we delegated to the university regents, and it was a good idea in principle. The challenge is we at the Texas legislature decide how much funding universities get. We decide what rules universities are going to follow. Sometimes we pass legislation that drives up costs for universities, but we don't have to be the bad guys who set the tuition. That separation causes problems. We cut higher education funding dramatically in the 2011 session, and none of those funds have been restored. And that's part of why y'all have seen tuition bills go up and up and up. So we at the legislature need to take more responsibility for that, take more responsibility for our decisions, and make those decisions internally.
Okay, so what is your stance on arresting protesters through local and state law enforcement? What constitutes a suitable offense during protesting?
Yeah, I really appreciate this question because I've recently been attacked on a piece of legislation I opposed related to this. There was a piece of legislation called House Bill 3557. I think it was called the Critical Infrastructure Protection Bill or something. And what this bill did was it added pipelines as a type of critical infrastructure. And it said that it would be a felony to either damage or deface critical infrastructure or impede the operation of critical infrastructure. Now, deface, that could include graffiti. Certainly do not want people to be prosecuted with a felony for graffiti. Impede operation. I asked questions about this legislation on the House floor, and the author of the bill said, yes, that absolutely could be used for somebody blocking a road to prevent somebody from building a pipeline. And so the reason that's important is that was the real purpose of the bill. The real purpose of this bill was to scare people out of protesting pipelines, like we saw with the Keystone XL pipeline, like folks thought might happen with the Kinder Morgan pipeline coming through Hays and Blanco counties. The purpose of that was to scare people from protesting. I fought the bill as hard as I could. I managed to make it a little bit better. We pulled the bit about graffiti out. So graffiti on a pipeline is not a felony right now. But unfortunately, the legislation had the votes because it had some very, very powerful folks behind it, namely the oil and gas industry of Texas. But that really illustrates the way I look at these issues is it should not be criminalized to show up and use your First Amendment right for free speech. We've seen a lot of attempts to try and pass laws to make it easier to criminalize common protesting activities. I will never support those. When we make arrests, it should be prioritized for situations where somebody has injured somebody or is creating severe risk of doing harm for folks. It should not be used as a deterrent to people standing up and asking their government to do better.
All right, so on a related note, like what kinds of criminal justice reforms, including incarceration and law enforcement, would you suggest for addressing racial inequalities?
I will be supporting the George Floyd Act that Representative Symphonia Thompson and the Legislative Black Caucus are working on right now. And they're working on the details of that. They have my full support. And some of those details will include mandating that implicit bias training is done for all law enforcement officers. It will include restricting the ability to arrest folks for low-level offenses, particularly misdemeanor C offenses. And it will heighten use of force standards to make sure all chokeholds are banned, as well as the particular maneuver with the knee that resulted in George Floyd's death. And that legislation will also be looking at use of force standards regarding response to protesters as well. My office is actually working specifically on the issue around less lethal munition. As many of y'all probably know, a Texas State student, Justin Howell, was actually injured by less lethal munition in the protests up in Austin, spent a long time in the hospital and has a brain injury. And he's not the only person who was injured in that way, who was hit in the head with less lethal munition. There's another young man who grew up in Buda named Anthony Evans, who was hit in the jaw. Luckily, he is, after surgery, has recovered quite well. But our law enforcement should not be permanently injuring protesters. They should not be permanently injuring folks who are at a demonstration exercising their First Amendment rights. So I'm working specifically on banning the use of less lethal munitions in crowd control situations. Some other areas we're looking at is decriminalizing marijuana. The Texas House actually passed that last session, but unfortunately it was dead on arrival in the Senate. We will bring that up again. I do want to say I support full legalization of marijuana, but right now decriminalization has some political legs, so we'll probably do that first. I also support transitioning Texas away from private prisons. The profit motive is really powerful. People should not be making money off people being incarcerated. We want all of our decisions about incarcerating folks to be based around public safety and our ability to help get those folks back to being members of our community. It should not be based around somebody making money off of it.
All right, so to the next question, I see this as a really important issue, but what are your plans to address and mitigate the effects of climate change?
Yeah, thank you so much for that question. We actually have a press release going out first thing tomorrow morning about this issue. I am honored to be chairing the Democratic Caucus's Committee on Clean Air, Clean Water, and Climate Change. And we founded that because we know that when Democrats take the majority in the Texas House, it is important that we are ready to move on protecting the environment and climate change in particular on day one. So we're going to be rolling out our Texas climate plan. That's going to involve targets to reduce emissions. It's going to include a timeline to ban routine flaring of natural gas in the Permian. Something that often happens as folks are producing oil or natural gas is they will burn off natural gas they can't get to market, which also contributes to climate change, despite us getting no productive value from burning it in that situation. It will include plans for a just transition of our workforce. We've got a lot of folks who work in oil and gas right now in Texas. We need to make sure that they have an economic path forward in the renewable energy economy. And that will also include, excuse me, also include directives to our state agencies to start planning for climate change. It is wild at the state level, y'all. State employees are afraid to talk about climate change and that it's happening at all. We had no hearings on legislation related to climate change last session. And that means that our agencies that deal with flood management and wildfires and which crops grow in a certain area are behind on planning for climate change. So it's going to include that directive as well. And then another piece we're going to be rolling out is the modern infrastructure bill, where we are going to invest in renewable energy infrastructure. That includes electrical transmission lines so we can get solar and wind power from where we produce it to where it needs to go. It's going to include investment in electrical vehicle charging stations. Something a lot of folks don't know is the federal government built a lot of gas stations when cars became a thing so that people knew they could get from one place to another without running out of gas. Now we have to go do the same thing with electrical vehicle charging stations. And it's also going to include funds to help electrify mass transit. So we're going to try and accelerate that transition as much as possible here in Texas. I can tell y'all I'm going to be front and center fighting to address climate change.
So many students are working and or will be entering the job market. What strategies do you plan for economic growth in this COVID era?
Yeah, I think we talked about this a little bit up front about just needing to make sure that we keep our pieces of our economy together and functioning. So that's really critical, and that's something that we need to be doing right now. It's something I'm concerned about. The governor hasn't spent $5.7 billion of the CARES Act funding that he got from the federal government. He just released a few $100 million of that for rental and housing assistance. I'm hopeful that will reach our community soon, but that's something I'm going to keep pushing for, to keep those pieces in place. And then I think we need to create a revolving fund that does microloans to small businesses so that they can keep their doors open. We saw that when the federal loan programs came down for businesses, theoretically small businesses, it got snapped up by large corporations first. And that's because there weren't enough guidelines in the program. And it's because banks worked with their biggest customers first. I mean, that was what was easiest for them. It was easier for them to do 10 big loans than 1,000 smaller ones. So we need to make sure we've got a micro loan program here in Texas to help small businesses get off the ground. Small businesses tend to employ more folks and spend more locally to help invigorate their local economy. So that's something I'm going to fight for to make sure that we are strong and resilient moving forward.
So, what is your view on immigration? What policies will you pursue related to changes in our current immigration policy? And lastly, what is your position on DACA?
Yeah, so I want to be clear. In the Texas legislature, we cannot make most immigration policy. That's federal. That said, I 100% support DACA being extended and a clear path to citizenship being made for DACA recipients. I also support us having a path to citizenship for folks who happen to arrive here when they are older. We're older than 18 and have been productive members of our community. Our immigration system is fundamentally broken, and folks have been saying they're about to fix it the entire time I've been alive. I'm 35, and that's really shameful at the federal level. So I will continue to encourage Congress to address that. In the meantime, we here in Texas need to do what's right for Texans. We don't need to prop up that broken federal system. And unfortunately, that's what we've had a habit of doing. Texas is allocating $500 million a year to border security. And honestly, the results we see from that are mostly more traffic tickets, which to me is not a great use of our resources. And it's created a really unpleasant situation for a lot of folks down in our border communities. We also passed, in my opinion, one of the most disgraceful laws that's come out of the state of Texas, Senate Bill 4. That legislation started out saying that every individual law enforcement agency had to comply with every immigrations and custom enforcement detainer. And what that means is if somebody was picked up, I will use a real world example that happened here in Hays County. If someone is picked up because they rolled through a stop sign, got a ticket, didn't pay it, have a warrant out for their arrest, they get another traffic violation, pulled over, warrants found, they're brought to the Hays County Jail. Hays County Jail runs that person through their system. Immigrations and Custom Enforcement goes, ooh, that flags somebody we're looking for. Hays County Jail then has to hold that person for 72 hours. Now, under previous law, it was the sheriff's department's choice whether or not to comply with that detainer. And they could choose whether or not that was in the best interest of how they saw public safety. And a lot of law enforcement agencies would say, okay, we're going to hold folks we have in for violent crimes, communicate with ICE on them, but folks that we have in for something minor, we don't think it's in the best interest of our community. And when this bill was being debated, most police chiefs of large cities came out against the bill, because they said it was going to undermine the confidence of the immigrant community in working with them. And it was going to result in fewer crimes being reported, and that it was going to result in fewer people willing to step up as witnesses for crimes. And we've seen some of those results in Texas. So that was the initial version of the bill, which was bad enough. It picked up a really ugly amendment on the House floor, a really ugly amendment that said that law enforcement officers could demand, if they believe someone isn't a citizen, that they can demand to see proof of legal presence in the country. Y'all, that's racial profiling. Nobody is ever going to ask me to prove that I am a citizen of the United States. That is something that is going to be used specifically against our brown and black community members. And it's even something where if the sheriff says, you can't do that, the way the law is written, this is the individual law enforcement officer's jurisdiction. That is empowering bad apples in our law enforcement community and is wrong. I and the rest of the Democratic caucus are going to do everything we can to repeal that bill. It's a tough row to hoe right now because we've got to get it through a Republican Senate. Well, we got to take the Texas House, and then we have to get it through a Republican Senate and through a Republican governor. But I'm really grateful for a lot of Texas state students' activism on this issue because it's something that's entirely wrong and needs to be fixed.
All right. Well, thank you so much for your time today, Representative Zwiener. Our first video clip is for Chip Roy, who could not attend the event tonight due to a conflicting event this evening. This interview was conducted by the Texas Tribune back in May 2020. This interview was focused on Mr. Roy's position on the response of COVID-19. We wanted to provide recordings of candidates who are unable to attend so that you would at least have an opportunity to hear directly from them, even if they weren't able to be with us this evening. Representative Roy is a Republican member of the House of Representatives representing District 21. He is running for re-election in the House of Representatives. He is on the ballot in the general election on November 3rd, 2020. This video was approved by Mr. Roy's campaign staff. Let's play the video.
Morning, Evan. How are you?
Good, thank you. Congressman, you saw Governor Abbott's announcement yesterday that we are one step closer to reopening Texas. Hair salons, nail salons, tattoo parlors, pools. You're all for this.
Well, I believe it's important for the people of Texas and for our nation for us to re-engage as a society. I think I've been very public about that. As you know, last Friday when the governor announced, he just announced previously that we were going to at least start the process, phase one of reopening restaurants. I thought it was really important for us to get out and get engaged. And I think the Statesman was there and Jonathan Tylab wrote a piece about it. But I went with my family to One in a Million and went and had some breakfast in East Austin and have been to a few places since then. And I think it's really important that we get out and show that we can safely and appropriately engage because people are hurting. 30 million unemployed across the nation, obviously a significant number in Texas, Central Texas. We've had 30,000 unemployment insurance claims as of last week. We'll get a bigger number tomorrow. And so it's really important for us to open up. And we can do it safely and wisely. And I think the governor's right to head in that direction. And look, one last point on that. You know, we've seen what's happened here with Shelley Luther in Dallas. There's other examples across the state of Texas. I talk to them every day. I mean, Evan, I've spent my time talking to people in the district who are hurting, barbershops, hair salons, restaurants.
Congressman, I want to come to Shelley Luther in a second. The news on that today I want to ask you about, but more broadly on this question of reopening Texas. Are you not worried that this is going to increase the spread of the coronavirus? Or are you resigned to the fact that some people are going to get sick, some people are going to die, right? We've heard Chris Christie, the former governor of New Jersey, yesterday echo comments of others in Texas who said, look, basically, we've got to accept the fact that some people are going to get sick, some people are going to die. We don't want that, but we just have to face reality, and reopening Texas trumps either of those things.
I think that framing misses it a little bit, with all due respect. It might be critical, but I think that's been part of the framing that has been causing people a little bit more of a concern about it, as opposed to, look, what we're talking about here is what is the healthiest, best way for us to move forward. I'm concerned about the negative second and third order health outcomes of a shutdown economy where you can't go see your doctor for, say, cancer screenings. I'm concerned about the negative second order health outcomes of people suffering from mental health and opioid addiction who aren't going to get treatment or care, or who, by the way, we now know, or we look at data that shows that you have a twice as likely chance of committing suicide in a situation where you're unemployed, right? When things stack up around you. 30 million unemployed. I mean, Evan, we can talk about the economy in a minute very separately, but 30 million unemployed. Put all of that in the pot. And the goal here is for the least amount of human harm, right? And so the virus is one piece of a much larger puzzle. So should we reopen our society? I believe yes. I think it is important for us to engage as human beings together, to worship together, to work together. Can we do it in a way that protects the most vulnerable, the elderly, the people who are immunocompromised? As you know, I'm a cancer survivor. I had to go through a spell where I had to make sure I was paying attention to how I was being exposed. And so it's important that we do that, and we can do that. And so I don't accept that as a sort of that sort of like a choice, right? Well, it's really harsh. I mean, it's also interesting. Bill Maher, of all people, right? I mean, I don't often agree with Bill Maher, although he tends to be has some libertarian streaks. He went on a rant the other night. You may have seen it, where he was explaining, guys, you know, for millennia, we've been fighting microbes, we've been fighting bacteria. You put your head down on a pillow, you grab a doorknob. Right. We need, and this is the last point, this is important. We need immune systems that are strong. We need immune systems that can fight this. We need herd immunity. So we have to work through this together to get re-engaged so we can build that up.
The point is simply that we believe that if we reopen the state, that there are going to be some people who, because we're all back together, are going to get sick. And I'm just making sure that you appreciate the fact that is a choice. For all the reasons you've said, you're also accepting the fact that in all likelihood, given the way this disease is transmitted, that more people are going to get sick. If that's okay, that's okay. But let's just say so.
Okay, but let's put the proper framing in it. Okay, so Governor Abbott is being criticized because he said in a private call a few days back that it is ipso facto correct that some more people will get exposed and some more people may get sick. Right. I do not disagree with the analysis on its face that is a true statement, but here's the problem. Here's the I guess positive. We need to be able to engage to do that for an overall net positive outcome. Right. In other words, we need to have society interacting together as safely and positively as possible to make sure it's happening. By the way, if we take the right steps to target nursing homes, where in many jurisdictions, 30 to 40 to 50% of the entire cases that have resulted in death or serious situations have come out of nursing homes. So we need to focus on the elderly. My dad is 77 years old. My mom is 71. That's how you address this.
Congressman, on the Shelley Luther case, which you just mentioned, speaking of the governor, Shelley Luther, the Dallas salon owner, famously now made a decision to keep her business open in violation, in defiance of both county and state orders. It was not just Dallas County Judge Clay Jenkins, whose order she was in defiance of. It was also the governor's order, backed by the Attorney General's office, by the office of your former boss, Ken Paxton, saying this. So yesterday, Ms. Luther was sentenced to 7 days in jail and was ordered to pay a fine of $500 per day that she remained open. It's about $7,000. You said yesterday on Twitter, you tweeted that you had spoken to her. You thought that the situation was terrible. You've said this a number of times. You believe that no American and no Texan should face this. Did she not violate the order of not just the county officials, but also Governor Abbott?
She certainly was disregarding those orders, and I think that that's something that obviously, as someone who worked in law enforcement as a federal prosecutor in the Attorney General's office, I obviously have a strong concern about, the rule of law. But here's
rule of law matters, Congressman, right? Rule of law matters.
The rule of law matters. It matters at the border, by the way. It matters in our streets. It matters for everybody that you follow law enforcement. And here's the thing that's really important. Go watch everything that Ms. Luther has done. She's been respectful at every turn. She has treated law enforcement respectfully. She has followed their direction on how she goes to handle her engagement with law enforcement. She was respectful to the judge. She disagrees. She is acting civilly disobedient in the face of something she thinks is wrong and that she would argue is arguably unconstitutional or unlawful. Now, I haven't studied every intricacy of the order that was given. I haven't had time to do that. But on its face, and I've been reached out to by a lot of people, the fact that a woman wanted to engage in a way in order to protect her family and take care of herself. Meanwhile, by the way, she hasn't been able to get a PPP program loan. I'm asking, by the way, the judges in Dallas, whether anybody in Dallas is willing to step up and say, you know what, we'll pay you for your losses. We'll compensate you for being shut down. We'll compensate everybody else. Or are they going to come to Washington and say, you know what, we need you to borrow another $1 trillion so that we can pay for local governments to keep people shut down? This is the woman who wanted to feed her family. She wanted to feed her family.
These are legitimate issues to discuss. I'm simply asking whether she did defy the governor's order. And here again, there was a letter from the Attorney General's office, Ken Paxton, no liberal, last week. In a letter, his office said, the governor's order is neither vague nor unenforceable. Local governments are prohibited from allowing businesses to reopen. She is in violation of the order. I heard you on the Mark Levin show a couple of weeks ago compare people who support stay-at-home orders to Nazi Germany. Were you talking about local officials, or were you talking about Governor Abbott and Attorney General Paxton?
Evan, hold on. That is completely... Now, look, you and I go way back. That's untrue. What you just said is completely not true. Now, hold on.
What did you say?
Evan, I'm not going to do this. We're sitting there in person. That's how we'll have this conversation. Let's slow down for a minute. Give me a minute to respond, because that is untrue. What I said, and that you're repeating the talking points of my political opponent in the DCCC right now. Let me be perfectly.
To the Mark Levin show.
Let me be perfectly clear. Yeah, go run the tape. Go run the tape. If you go back and look at what I said in that interview, what I was talking about was a Maine sheriff who I believe was responding to and pushing back on the Maine governor for not stay-at-home orders, but because they were enforcing people being able to be out on the highway in order to go something and just doing stops, stopping people to check them, as opposed to being able to go through and say, hey, we're going to have a common sense response like the local law enforcement that I've seen here in Texas, the Hays County Sheriff, for example, who basically said the same thing, said, hey, I'm not going to go around stopping people on the street. And my point was that when you have government stepping in police state kind of format where you're stepping on civil liberties, which you and everybody else that I know, particularly our great state of Texas, across the political spectrum, should be concerned about civil liberties. You've got people getting stopped for no reason. So now go back to your question. Is she disregarding or disobeying an order? Yes. And she's dealing with that right now. My point is we shouldn't be coming down with a 7-day jail, no bail sentence for her wanting to keep her barbershop or hair salon. Sorry, I'm a guy, although I haven't been to the barbershop in a long time. Hair salon open because she's wanting to take care of her family. She said in court yesterday, I want to feed my kids. She told the judge that.
Will you call on her to be pardoned, as some others have done since she was sentenced yesterday?
I haven't done that because I haven't looked at how the pardon statute, if it's such a, how the pardon system works in the state of Texas. I don't know. And as you know, because I used to work in the Attorney General's office and prosecutor, I hate to always tell people what they ought to do without going and looking at the statute myself. I do believe that steps should be taken, state or local, to make sure this woman's not spending time in jail. And look, I believe that across the board, by the way, and in situations where people have this kind of a situation where the government is stepping down, not just this woman, but others.
Okay. Congressman, so the theory of the case here is that we can reopen Texas because we trust people to be responsible, or we need to trust people to take measures in their own lives and their own communities that will allow us to endure whatever is coming once we reopen the state, right? Yeah. That's the theory of the case here. Right. Is your cursory view of how people have behaved in the midst of this give you confidence that that's going to be the case? We have seen photographs of people at Barton Springs or in Zilker Park in Austin or in other communities around the state where people don't really seem to be observing social distancing, don't seem to be respecting the basic courtesies that would be extended to them, hopefully, in a situation in which we can all get through this together. What is your read on how the public is responding?
My observation is, and I've been out and about a lot in the district, trying to be I've met with the sheriffs of most of the counties I represent. I've met with hospital administrators. I've gone to help with the food bank 3 or 4 times, San Antonio, Fredericksburg, Hays County. Really, and by the way, the food bank's doing a phenomenal job. A little side note about what they're trying to do to help people. They really are doing an extraordinary job. Right. But my observation has been mostly, there's always the hiccups, mostly people very much following. I mean, you walk into Home Depot, whether it's in Hays County where I've been or in South Austin on Brody Lane, most people are wearing masks. Most people are socially distancing. You're sitting there in front of the bolt drawer or the plumbing's aisle, and I've been there a few times during this, and you're pulling out a drawer and someone kind of comes up and says, excuse me. They don't walk right up, and they kind of keep a wide berth. I've been on airplanes flying to DC where we had 17 people on one flight, 40 on another, people spaced out across the plane. People wore masks. If they were separated it up, they might lift the mask and because they're sitting there sleeping. Right. People are, for the most part, because they're rational, self-interested human beings, they're taking steps to try to protect themselves and their loved ones. And, I said to Jonathan Tylov in the Statesman last Friday that I wouldn't go to 1 in a million with my 10-year-old, 9-year-old son and daughter, my wife, if I thought that was going to endanger them in a meaningful way. I also noted, kind of like Governor Abbott said, I noted that was I at a higher risk of getting the virus there than at my house? Yeah, technically, probably so. But there's no way I can dodge the virus fully. I can't live indefinitely dodging the virus. Right. So I didn't know if I got sick last week. I wouldn't know whether I got it at 1 in a million or whether I got it on the airplane a week before. On the airplane, whether I got it at Home Depot or HEB. Yeah.
Congressman, you've called out the fact that you have seen people wearing masks in various places. We solicited questions from readers this week, and overwhelmingly the question we received more than any other is, why won't Congressman Roy wear a mask? You were famously one of the Republican members who, when on the floor of the House, were called back to vote. You did not wear a mask. That was reported accurately, right?
Sure. Yeah, no, that's correct.
Have you
All right, next we have Representative Lloyd Doggett. He is a Democratic member of the House of Representatives representing District 35. He is running for re-election to the House of Representatives. He is on the ballot in a general election on November 3rd, 2020. Thank you, Representative Doggett, for joining us to this evening for our virtual town hall. Okay, all right, well, jump right into our, you still want me to go or no?
He's having some technical difficulties. He's not on yet.
Okay. All right, we're having some technical difficulties.
Hey, CJ. Hey,
Yes.
I know we're having a few technical difficulties waiting on Representative Doggett to join us, but I was wondering if while we're waiting, you could tell us a little bit about the event that was hosted yesterday out at the Strahan parking lot.
I'll be happy to answer your question, and I can tell you how many people got registered. So yesterday, starting at 8 a.m. until 8 p.m., Move Texas, Texas Rising, College Democrats, the Young Conservatives, and also the Voter Friendly Campus all joined forces to register students and also people who live in Hays County or just in general to register to vote, since yesterday was the deadline. We did a drive-through voter registration. We played music. We also had the help of athletics. We couldn't do it without them. I want to give a special shout out to the athletics department. We got pretty packed up around like noon. Definitely when like people started getting out of class, like and work. So like at 3, 4, 5. And also when we started wrapping up, we got a lot of people. We registered 676 people to vote. Fun fact, that's more people that registered to vote than the margin for the 2000 election between Bush and Gore in Florida. So that could be enough that could be a margin for an election here in Hays County or just within the state of Texas. So great to see all those people getting registered.
Wow.
And thank you,
awesome.
Dr. Ben, for allowing us to have it. Special shout out to you.
Of course, of course. I'm just really proud of all of our students. So proud of our student leaders who have been so fully engaged this semester during the election season. And so I just am really proud of the work that you all are doing. So a shout out to our students for all of the great work that you all are doing. So CJ, can you talk a little bit about, I know you're one of the students on the 2020 elections task force. Can you talk about why that task force has been something that you have particularly enjoyed being a part of, or just some things that you could share about the work of the task force and its importance to students?
Oh, definitely. I'm a political science major, and for jobs I've done, I've worked with political campaigns and organizations, and elections is something that really interests me a lot. As someone that's young, Latinx, I believe people like me, or just young people in general, need to pay attention to the elections, especially this election, because it's going to have a lot of consequences for young people coming in the future, regardless if it's a pandemic, climate change, or even racial injustice. It's going to have big impact on young people specifically. And that's why I joined the elections task force. And I was quite excited to join it too.
Well, we have certainly appreciated your work as well as your colleagues. We have quite a number of students on the task force. In fact, it looks like we've got our guest here, Representative Doggett. Looks like he's joining us. So I'm going to go ahead and pop off here. Okay.
All right, I'll reintroduce him. So next we have Representative Lloyd Doggett. He is a Democratic member of the House of Representatives representing District 35. He is running for re-election to the House of Representatives. He is on the ballot in the general election on November 3rd, 2020. Thank you, Representative Doggett, for joining us this evening for our virtual town hall. We'll jump right into our first question. What are your priorities in seeking/holding office? What characteristics make you the best candidate for this office?
Well, I'm wearing one of my Bobcat Build shirts. It's been my good fortune to work for many years with Texas State and Texas State students. Actually, my first experience at Texas State was coming there and knowing no one as a 26-year-old, just a couple years out of law school. And I was fortunate to carry Hays County and be elected as a state senator to work in Austin as the baby senator, as they referred to me. You can tell from looking at me, that's been a couple years ago. In the meantime, I also had an opportunity to serve for 6 years in a black robe on our state's highest court and look at the way our judiciary affects our lives. And in more recent times, I've represented a wide part of Texas in the U.S. Congress, originally elected from Austin, my hometown, and then with Republicans trying to gerrymander me out of office, having an opportunity to represent the Texas border area stretching down to Houston, and now a narrow strip that runs from North Austin to the south side of San Antonio and includes parts of San Marcos, but most particularly all of the Texas State campus and the area to the east of there, mostly along the east side of I-35. You know, when I first got to Congress, I wasn't too excited about the seniority system, but it's grown on me over the years. And now I serve as the second ranking member on the Ways and Means Committee and the chair of the Health Subcommittee. So many of my priorities are focused on how can we make our health system deliver and function. We have 5 million people in the state of Texas, citizens who do not have health care. And my work is focused on how do we maintain the health care we have now? How do we improve and strengthen it, particularly during this time of pandemic? There are many other issues that I'm sure will be covered in some of your questions, but I'm very concerned about comprehensive immigration reform, the climate crisis, which is an existential challenge to our Earth, and a wide range of other issues. Certainly in visiting with you and your colleagues with education, how do we make education more affordable? How do we assure that more people can get all the education that they're willing to work for? So those would be among my objectives and my background.
All right, let's get to the next question. What are your plans to address and mitigate effects of climate change?
Well, as I mentioned, this is an existential challenge. A number of years ago, I offered a cap and trade system to respond to this. I now think we can move beyond that, though basically we have to find a way to put a price on carbon. I think that there are a wide range of measures that will be needed. I voted, of course, in favor of the legislation we have passed in the House in this Congress, which is simply designed to require the president to come up with a national plan to deal with the climate crisis instead of being our denier in chief, and to rejoin the Paris Accords, weak as they are. I believe we are seeing the effects of climate change right now, not just in Antarctica with ice sheets melting that would raise the level of the sea perhaps as much as 10 feet, not just polar bears in the Arctic, though that's important, but right here in Texas with increased tropical disease, erratic weather that buried Houston under almost 5 feet of water, and the desertification of other parts of our state. I think we need to make this one of our highest priorities in the next Congress and look to how is the most effective way to put a price on carbon, and how do we encourage more clean energy? We continue to subsidize fossil fuels and fossilized thinking, and we need to be focusing on the fact that Texas is not just an oil and gas state, but it is the leading wind producer and may soon be the leading solar producer. We need to be encouraging innovative technology, which will mean more jobs and a cleaner planet.
All right, without a doubt, climate change is an important issue. Let's get to the next question. How might you see the federal, state, and/or local government assisting communities during the COVID-19 pandemic? And can you also please respond to the level of office that you're seeking as well?
Sure. We have an example of this very day in President Trump declaring that he wants no more negotiations until after the election on a relief bill. In the House, we passed legislation on May 15th. The Senate waited 2 months to even respond, and now we've gone another 2 or 3 months with no relief. I believe that one of the key areas in which there is conflict is the refusal of President Trump and his enablers to support assistance for state and local government. Now, I'm not too excited about the assistance to the state because I think Greg Abbott is a big part of the problem, and that his mismanagement and his allegiance to Trump has literally led to the deaths of many people here in the state of Texas with a high death toll we've had out of this. I see the role of the federal government as backing up state and local government. I oppose Governor Abbott's restricting local governments in what they could do to fight this pandemic. I want to see resources coming to our county and city governments and to our universities. We did in our previous legislation get some assistance to Texas State, much of that available to help students with financial assistance and other things on campus. One of the areas that we've had the most deficiency at the national level with Trump's denial, delay, and ongoing deception is the refusal to get a national plan in place. Our legislation would get a plan in place with more testing, more contact tracing, and more supply of personal protective equipment. There is so much that needs to be done that we need state, local, and federal government working together. Instead, the president had the governors competing against themselves for a shortage of testing and personal protective equipment. And it was our local leaders, largely at the city and county level, that make tough decisions like the mayor of Austin canceling South by. Very painful for our musicians and for our community and just for the joy of life. I think going forward with a new administration, we'll see much more cooperation at all levels of government because it will take all of us to overcome this pandemic. The next big step, and I was on a conference call about this afternoon with a couple of leading medical experts, one from Minnesota, one from Brown in Rhode Island, will be the vaccine issue and Trump's desire to rush a vaccine out before it's been proven to be effective and not have side effects. He seems to be just dumping that on the states to figure out the distribution. Clearly, it'll be rationing at the beginning. We need to have an effective plan to see that those who most need the vaccine, our frontline health workers and first responders, and the people of color who have been so adversely affected by this pandemic, much more than Anglos in most cases, or have access to this vaccine, and it doesn't go out just to the powerful and the connected.
All right. So what strategies would you employ in your elected office to improve our educational system at the K-12 and university level?
Well, I have to say first, I want to broaden your question a little bit because my wife has served as a deputy secretary of education focusing on pre-K, and that is her big cause. We both were present. She was actually speaker for an opening of a pre-K center in San Marcos a few years ago, which has also provided many teaching and educational opportunities for Texas State students. I believe we need to focus first and foremost on our youngest Texans and provide them the educational opportunities to be ready to go to school. I support increased funding from pre-K to post-grad. I want financial barriers to not slow down people in getting access to education. I was successful in getting approval of the American Opportunity Tax Credit provisions that provide a direct reduction from taxes for textbooks, instructional materials, and tuition. It's not big enough, and we need more fundability on it, but it was a good start. Another of the areas I've worked on is FAFSA. You ought not to have to graduate from Texas State before you can figure out how to fill it out. And I've been trying to simplify it to get IRS and the Department of Education to work together. We were successful in passing some legislation on a bipartisan basis last year. Now I'm about trying to ensure that it gets implemented so that we really see a reduction in the number of questions. Beyond that, we're just going to have to provide more funding for educational research at our institutions of higher learning. And Texas State is clearly in the running for significant additional funds if we get a new administration.
All right, so you mentioned this question earlier, but what is your view on immigration and what policies will you pursue related to the changes in our current immigration policy? And lastly, what is your position on DACA?
Well, I've been a sponsor of legislation through about 4 sessions of Congress with regard to DACA. Having met with a number of students and recent graduates, I think of a friend of mine who is a prosecutor in Travis County, and he's a dreamer. I think of a young man I met who's a cardiac nurse at a hospital. Many students, some small business people, some people involved in tech. Our dreamers in the main have known only this country. They need to have a quick path to citizenship. I have resisted all of the efforts that the Trump administration has made to undermine and disavow our dreamers. Indeed, I'll share with you a personal story. I've only been, I don't go to White House gatherings for social events in this administration, but I did go to the White House one time, and that was to meet President Trump with some of my colleagues about taxes. And I got his attention as he talked on and on by saying that he had a tweet that I really liked. And that tweet was words that he had early on about how could anybody want to remove these dreamers from our country. And I raised that along with comments from the president of Microsoft, who said, before you do a tax cut, you should deal with dreamers. Well, the president kind of talked back and forth, said everybody ought to be supporting the dreamers, but then he did nothing about it. And he's used them as a bargaining chip. When Lindsey Graham and Dick Durbin went over to talk to him, that's when he went into a incredible racist diatribe about Africa and other countries. I think that the DREAM Act must be passed, but it's not enough. Many dreamers tell me, what about my parents? They made the sacrifices to get me here. And we need really comprehensive immigration reform of the type that the Senate passed 7 years ago on a strong bipartisan vote. I believe that there's nothing that will quite unlock our Texas economy at less cost than comprehensive immigration reform and passing a DREAM Act. We need to do all of it together. It will be more difficult next year because so much hate and division has been promoted by Trump, anti-immigrant hysteria, the mistreatment of immigrants at the border with the Remain in Mexico policy, and the total rejection of asylum claims, the putting children in cages and separating them from their parents. I worked on many of these as individual cases when we hear about injustices from ICE. But what we really need is broad, comprehensive immigration reform and no more Stephen Miller in the middle of this.
All right, thank you so much, Representative Doggett, for being with us. A true honor to speak with you. I would like to let our virtual town hall audience attendees know that we have provided campaign and information links for Aaron Zwiener, Carrie Isaac, Chip Roy, Lloyd Doggett, and Wendy Davis in a chat box. We also added links for those who did not respond to our requests for information or videos, as well as those who sent in videos and are in attendance.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate the chance to visit with you, and I certainly ask for your vote and that of all that are participating, be they a Republican or a Democrat. Now's the time to be concerned about the health of our democracy and to work together. Thank you so much.
All right, Wendy, you can go ahead and introduce yourself and tell us a little bit more about why you're running for Congress.
Hello, I'm Wendy Davis. I'm running for Congress in Texas Congressional District 21. and I'm the Democratic nominee. I served 6 years in the Texas State Senate, and prior to that, 9 years on a city council. I'm running to try to create the brighter future that my granddaughters, Ellis and Sawyer, deserve. And it was really with them in mind and in my heart that I decided to put myself forward to run for this position. I want them to grow up in a world, just as I want every child to grow up in a world where they have access to affordable quality health care, where they grow up with the ability to breathe clean air and drink clean water, and that they can go to not just good schools, but schools that are safe from gun violence. I'm running against Chip Roy, and I bring him up in this introduction because I think it's important to note that I'm running to make sure, as I've always done, that I can be a voice for people who need a fighter in their corner. I think the most dramatic difference between Chip Roy and myself is that I am a fighter for people, and he's a fighter for special interests, and our campaigns certainly reveal that. I'm looking forward to an opportunity to answer your questions, and I'm certainly looking forward to the opportunity to serve you, to have the privilege of serving you in Congress. I can't hear you, Catherine. Can't hear you.
Okay, we're now being recorded again. So the first question is, what are your priorities in seeking or holding office? And then what experience and or characteristics make you the best candidate for this office?
When I entered this race, I entered it really to be the fighter that future generations like my granddaughters need. And there were three main priorities that really propelled me to run. One of those was the very planet that we're standing on, making sure that I'm doing my part to deliver a sustainable future, not only for your generation, but for so many generations to come. I also entered this race because as a grandmother, it breaks my heart that my granddaughters will grow up in a world where they have to go to school and learn how to hide from an active shooter because we've failed to do our part to pass common sense gun safety reform. And that's because, of course, the NRA has held sway with so many lawmakers, and it's time for that to stop. And then finally, because we live in a state that has the highest percentage of uninsured people in this country, I'm running to make sure that we can provide affordable, accessible health care for all. My experience as a state legislator really informs my ability to go to Congress and do this job well. I passed more than 70 bills in a Republican House, Republican Senate, and with a Republican governor. And I did that because I know how to work across the aisle to get things done. That's what I think is broken in Washington right now. We have to be problem solvers, and we have to be willing to sit down at a table with the push and pull that is a natural part of lawmaking and come forward with solutions that our communities and certainly your generation deserves.
Awesome, thank you. So your next question is, what is your view of immigration and what policies would you pursue related to changes in the current immigration policy? What is your position on DACA?
As a grandmother, it truly broke my heart to see children the same ages as my 2- and 4-year-old granddaughters who had been separated from their mothers and deprived of adequate medical care and proper nutrition. And look, we have to get this right. We have to stop demagoguing on this issue, roll up our sleeves, and once and for all provide a solution for common sense, comprehensive immigration reform. And that means making sure that our dreamers are allowed the full rights of citizenship in this country, that we provide that pathway for people who are our temporary protected status holders, that we continue to provide refuge for those who are seeking asylum in this country because they face existing dangers at home. We owe it to the economy of this state, to the businesses of this state, and to our overall well-being in America and our ability to compete in the marketplace to get this right. This, again, is one of those issues that if we would simply sit down, work across the aisle, and try to come up with the best solutions, once and for all, we can pass common sense immigration reform.
Well, thank you, Wendy. Your next question is, what is your plans to address and mitigate the effects of climate change? I know you mentioned this briefly already.
Yes, I mean, of course, climate change is the greatest existential threat that we face in this country. And that means that we're going to have to do some really hard work to address it. And it isn't just the long-term future of the health of this planet that we need to be focusing on. It's also the here and now and some immediate issues that confront us. In the long-term focus, one of the first things we have to do is unwind all of the horrible unwinding of protections that the Trump administration has engaged in since he took office, decimating our air and water quality protections. We have to re-enter the Paris Climate Accord and be a leader on these issues because we should be expected to be the leader. We also have to make sure that we are forcefully moving in the direction of providing the kind of transformational energy production that this country needs and deserves. And Texas can be a leader in this. We've led the way in wind and in solar. And we've got to roll up our sleeves and get the job done to make sure that we're carbon neutral by at least 2050, if not sooner. But in the here and now, we've also got some very real issues that confront us. In the beautiful Texas Hill Country, of course, that Texas State University is on the edge of, we see a gigantic pipeline, the Permian Highway pipeline, that's been placed, grabbing up private property, threatening the aquifers there and threatening the water supply, with people having absolutely no voice in what was happening to them. We've also seen the industrialization of the beautiful Texas Hill Country with cement quarries and cement plants and rock crushing facilities, each of which are endangering the air quality health of the people and the preservation of the beautiful Texas Hill Country landscape. Our children deserve fighters on these issues, and I'm certainly going to continue, as I did in the Texas Senate, to fight to make sure that we have clean air, clean water, and that we're fighting for a clean energy future.
Thank you so much for that answer. For the next question, many students are working and or will be entering the job market. What strategies do you plan for economic growth during this COVID era?
It's such a challenging time. Obviously, we are facing the greatest crisis our country has ever known, not only with regard to our health, but of course, with regard to the economy. And the first most important thing that we need to do is to restore our health. We have to do that by being observant of every protocol needed to get this virus under control. While people like my opponent have been leading coronavirus skeptics, have refused to wear masks in public and flaunted those rules, people like him who have advocated that we should just completely widely reopen everything, allow 2/3 of our population to become infected until we can finally get to the other side of the disease. Meanwhile, tens of thousands of Texans would die in the process. That is not the answer. The answer is to listen to public health officials and do everything we can before we have a vaccine in place to get this virus under control. If we don't do that, we will never be able to get our schools and our businesses fully functioning again. And for you, what that means, of course, is a greater challenge in the job market. And one of the greatest responsibilities that we have right now as lawmakers is to provide our businesses with the support that's needed to help them bridge this difficult time. That means extending the PPP loans that helped businesses stay afloat. And it means making sure that we focus those on small businesses, not huge multinational corporations and the LA Lakers like my opponents supported. We also need to make sure that we are providing people who are currently unemployed. And as you know, the supplemental unemployment benefit ended many weeks ago. We have so many families in this country that are laying awake at night, worrying about how they're going to keep the lights on or even a roof over their head and food on the table. And that calls upon each and every one of us as a lawmaker to set aside partisanship and to be focused on the solutions that are going to help us get to the other side of this. Only when we do will the young people like you who deserve to graduate from school and to go to work and to fully realize your potential and all of the dreams that you have for yourself, only then will those things happen. And I can assure you, I am committed to making sure that I'm in your corner fighting for the future that you deserve.
Okay, thank you for your answer. The next question is, what is your stance on arresting protesters through local and state law enforcement? What constituencies constitutes an arrestable offense during protesting?
You know, we have a sacred right to protest in this country. I participated weeks and weeks ago at a Black Lives Matter peaceful protest march from Huston-Tillotson University to the Texas Capitol. It was an experience that was empowering and uplifting because it reminded me of the fact that this is a deeply embedded principle that belongs to us and one of the things that makes us unique as a democracy. And it was right that we did that. It was right that we stood up against criminal injustices that are happening particularly to brown and black-skinned people in this country. It is right that we demand necessary reforms. What is not right is when peaceful protesters find themselves subjected to overreaching law enforcement efforts like tear gas and rubber bullets. We saw that happening in Austin, where students, young people, were put in a situation where they were harmed simply by exercising their rights to peacefully speak out. Now, look, no one wants rioting, no one wants looting, and we all know that that actually does a disservice to our efforts to peacefully bring forward issues of concern and to raise public awareness and to demand needed changes. But we shouldn't subject peaceful protesters to that kind of response. And we certainly shouldn't be arresting peaceful protesters. Only if someone is violating the law should they be put in a position where law enforcement takes them into custody.
Okay, thank you. We have one more question for you. How might you see federal, state, and or local government assisting communities during the COVID-19 pandemic? Please respond to the level of office you are seeking.
So, one of the most important things that the federal level can do right now is actually to support our other levels of government. We have municipalities, school districts, and the state level educational supports that are all being stressed by virtue of the fact that their revenues have been so severely depressed because of this pandemic. And what we can do at the federal level is to make sure that we pass that bill that's before the U.S. Senate right now, that is passed out of the U.S. House, allowing for billions of dollars in support for the local levels. And that support, of course, will go to make sure that people can have good access to health care, to testing, and that cities and school districts can continue to do the job they have to do for their communities. We also, though, have to make sure that our businesses can survive this downturn. And that means providing the kind of sustenance and support to them to keep them going. And as I mentioned earlier, for people who are unemployed as a result of this pandemic through no fault of their own, we must continue the supplemental unemployment benefits that they were receiving. And we need to have another stimulus check for them, because our entire economy is going to suffer if we can't help people bridge the divide right now. And I'm committed to making sure that we move through this moment with compassion, not only that we're leading by example about how we get this virus under control, but also that we are placing ourselves in the shoes of everyday Texans, everyday students like you, everyday Americans who are facing the economic outfall of this virus, and that we are helping them get to the other side of it economically while we work to get to the other side of it with regard to finally and once and for all defeating this virus.
Awesome. Thank you so much for taking the time to meet with us. For any student watching this video, just a reminder that early voting starts October 13th at the Performing Arts Center. We are not at the LBJ Student Center because of COVID-19. Again, Wendy, thank you so much for taking the time for recording this with me. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording.
All right. Our last candidate was Wendy Davis, and that was a recording which she provided for tonight's town hall. She was a former state senator and Fort Worth City Council member, and she is a Democratic nominee for Texas 21st Congressional District for the House of Representatives. The individual posing questions to Ms. Davis is Catherine Wicker, our Texas State Voter-Friendly Campus Coordinator. We appreciate Catherine's help with this interview with Wendy Davis. We would also like to let you know that Ms. Jenny Garcia Sharon could not attend due to a previous engagement. For more information, please visit the link we include in the chat box. All right, the next thing we're going to be doing is that we are going to have a few words from our chair of our Texas State Philosophy Department, Dr. Craig Hanks. Dr. Hanks will provide us with a few thoughts regarding the importance of political dialogue and what healthy dialogue and discourse is all about in democratic societies.
Good evening, and welcome to this evening's election town hall. I'm Craig Hanks. I'm a member of the university's election task force and the current chair of the Department of Philosophy. Thank you for your interest in this fall's elections, and thank you for your interest in this evening's conversation. Elections are crucially important in a democratic society, but neither elections nor democracy exist in a vacuum. Elections are crucially important because they're a moment when members of a democratic society collectively pass judgment on things such as transit plans or building new fire stations, renovating libraries, or who will sit as a judge or be a member of a legislative body. And in this country, they're also about who will serve us as our president. Elections are crucially important, but they do not exist in a vacuum. They take place in the context of a particular moment in the history of a particular social group, whether it be an election for homecoming court at Texas State University or for President of the United States. Elections are one way that democratic citizens participate in self-governance. But democracy as a social political system is about more than elections. It is a habit of self-governance that's woven into the fabric of work and play, family and business, everyday life. Democracy, vibrant, healthy democracy is work. It's hard work, and it demands that we, its members, cultivate habits of thoughtful and respectful engagement. In other words, democracy requires dialogue. Now, many of you know of our philosophy dialogues. It's a series of public conversations about difficult topics, open to all Bobcats and to members of our broader community. These dialogues are now in their 26th year, and even in these pandemic times, we're hosting over 50 conversations this semester. And you can find information about all of these on our departmental website. The dialogue series provides a structured opportunity for thoughtful conversations about topics of common concern. We focus on dialogue because it's a form of both public engagement and community building. Now, dialogue can take many forms. In all of its forms, it is distinct from debate or discussion. Discussion is open-ended and often has no particular goal or endpoint. Debate is about winning and persuading. Dialogue, however, is about increasing understanding, gaining knowledge of ourselves, of each other, and of the world we live in. Now, many things we do, such as speaking a second language, playing a musical instrument or a sport, require practice in order to do them. Dialogue is like that, as is democracy. They require practice to develop the skills and habits of careful listening, respectful speaking, being willing to change one's mind, and always looking for and expecting reasons, good reasons from ourselves and others, for beliefs and actions. Dialogue requires practice. One of the wonderful things about dialogue is that every instance of genuine dialogue, whether structured, as is tonight's town hall, or as informal, as are the many dialogues we have in our everyday interactions, there are always opportunities to both practice and participate, to be simultaneously a teacher and a learner. So thank you for joining this evening's dialogue, a conversation, an opportunity to learn about the November election, to learn about ourselves, to think about where we are and where we might go together. Thank you, and I hope to see you at some of the philosophy dialogues this semester.
All right, we appreciate Dr. Hanks for those thoughtful and informative remarks. We always appreciate Dr. Hanks' insightful perspectives and appreciate him for preparing those remarks for this evening. In closing out this evening's town hall, we will be giving a shout out to our voter-friendly campus fellows, Jessica Myers and Kaylin Garcia, both of which are poli-sci majors. Trevor and Christian, let's turn it over back to you, the two of you, and our VFC fellows.
Hi, I'm Kaylin. This is my partner, Jess. And here at Campus Road Project, it is a nonpartisan organization at Texas State University. And our job is to have full dedication and empowering students with the information they need to register and vote. We work directly with the university to aid students with any questions or concerns they have with voting on campus and directly in their community. With that, some of our most impactful work this far we've done is Save Lane on campus. And with that, we've really taken precautions like with sanitation and proper social distancing. On National Voter Registration Day, we hope to register approximately 275 students. And just yesterday, which was the last day to register to vote here in Texas, we collabed with some of our friends of Move Texas, Texas Rising, and the local NAACP chapter and other great organizations to register over 700 students and local community members.
Even though the voter registration period is over, we still have a lot of work to do. Throughout this week, which is Voter Education Week, we'll be working hard to get our student body and other San Marcos residents informed about when, where, and what they'll need to vote, as well as how you can get more information about the candidates that you've previously heard from tonight. Thank you for staying civically engaged during such an important time, and make sure you stay informed. We'll remain dedicated to helping you with that, but you can always go to texasstate.edu/vote and votetexas.gov to keep up to date for any additional voting information. Thank you guys again, and remember to go vote starting October 13th.
All right. So I just want to, first of all, thank all of our candidates who were able to come. And even though there were some candidates who were unable to join us tonight, we wanted to make sure you had their information. So we've included all the information in the chat box on the candidates who attended, as well as those who were unable to, or those who didn't respond. We will continue to reach out to the candidates so that we can get as much information as we can to include on our voter information hub. So we want to thank our candidates, but also especially we want to thank you. It's really important that we thank you for attending tonight's town hall. I also want to thank the members of our 2020 elections task force, our young conservatives of Texas State, College Democrats, Philosophy Department, School of Social Work, and our voter-friendly campus fellows and our voter-friendly campus coordinator, Catherine Wicker, for working collaboratively to coordinate tonight's town hall. So I want to give you a little bit of information about the task force. So the task force, the work of the task force is intended to facilitate an educational process that maximizes students' engagement, understanding, and their opportunities to participate in the electoral process during the 2020 election season and throughout the fall semester. The work of the task force is student-centered and student-driven. We have focused on registration. Now that that's over, we're focusing on helping to prepare our students to vote and encouraging our students to make a plan to vote. When you make a plan, especially if you plan to go with a friend, it's easier to avoid conflicts that could interfere with getting to the polls. I want to remind you, as our fellows did, that early voting starts October 13th and it goes through the 30th. And if you live here in San Marcos, you can vote right here at the Performing Arts Center during early voting from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. We encourage you to early vote because it will enable you to stay safe. It helps you to better adhere to safety protocols because it decreases the number of people who may congregate in order to cast their votes. So remember, October 13th is the first day to early vote. October 23rd, vote by mail applications are due. The last day to early vote is October 30th, and November 3rd is Election Day. For more information, please check out the Texas State Voter Information Hub at txstate.edu/vote. Tomorrow night will be the second part of our town hall programming, and it will feature and focus on local candidates, mayoral and city council candidates, We will continue our educational programming throughout the semester, including election night, watch events, as well as post-election discussions and debriefing programs. Remember, your voting right is your most important civil right because it protects all of your other rights. So make a plan to vote and take a friend with you. Good evening, and we hope to see you again tomorrow night. Same time, same channel. Thank you.